Ages before the sinking of Atlantis, thousands of years before the Christian era, Egypt was a land of great truths. The hand of the Great White Brotherhood was held out to the empire of the Nile, and the passages of the ancient pyramid resounded with the chants of the initiates. It was then that the Pharaoh, now called half-human and half-divine, reigned in ancient Egypt. Pharaoh is the Egyptian word for king. Many of the later pharaohs were degenerate and of little account. It is only early pharaohs we now list among the priest kings. Try to picture for a moment the great hall of Luxorit's inscriptive columns holding up domes of solid granite, each column carved with the histories of the gods. There at the upper end of the chamber sat the Pharaoh of the Nile in his robes of state. Around him were his counselors, chief among them, the priest of the temple. An imposing spectacle it was, the gigantic frame of the later Atlantean, robed in gold and priceless jewels. On his head, the crown of the north and south, the double empire of the ancients. On his forehead, the coiled serpent of the initiate, the serpent which was raised in the wilderness, that all who looked upon it might live. This uraeus represented the sleeping serpent power in man which, coiled head downward around the tree of life, drove him from the garden of the Lord, but which, raised upon the cross, became the symbol of the Christ. The Pharaoh was an initiate of Scorpio, and the serpent is the transmuted Scorpio energy which, working upward in the regenerated individual, is called the Kundalini. This serpent was the sign of initiation. It meant that within him the serpent had been raised, for the true Pharaoh was a priest of God, as well as a master of men. He sat upon the cube altar throne, indicating his mastery over the four elements of his physical body as judge of the living and of the dead. In his hand, he carried the triple scepter of the Nile, the flail or whip, the shepherd's crook, and the Anubis-headed staff. These were the symbols of his work. They represented the powers that he had mastered. With the whip, he had subjugated his physical body. With the shepherd's crook, he was the guardian and keeper of his emotional body. With the Anubis-headed staff, he was master of his mind and worthy to wield the powers of government over others, because, first of all, he obeyed the laws himself. With all his robes of state, with the scarab upon his breast, and with the all-seeing eye above his throne, there was still nothing as precious or as sacred to the ancient Egyptian priest-king as the triangular girdle or apron, which was the symbol of his initiation. The apron of the ancient Egyptian earned with it the same symbolism as the Masonic apron of today. It symbolized the purification of the body when the seat of the lower emotions, Scorpio, was covered by the white sheepskin of purification. This symbol of his purification was the most precious belonging of the ancient pharaoh, and this plain insignia, worn by many others below him in rank and dignity, but equal to him in spiritual purification, was the most precious of all things to the priest-king. There he sat enthroned, adorned with the symbols of his purification and mastery, a wise king over a wise people. And it was through these priest-kings that the divine worked, for they were of the order of Melchizedek. Through them was formulated that doctrine which degeneracy has not been able entirely to obliterate, which we know as the divine right of kings. Divine because through spirituality and growth, God was able to manifest through them. They were conscious instruments in the hands of a ready ruler, willing and proud to do the work of those with whom, through knowledge and truth, they had attuned themselves. But the time came, as in all nations, when selfishness and egotism entered the hearts of kings and people alike, and slowly the hand of the Great White Brotherhood that had fed ancient Egypt was withdrawn, and the powers of darkness transformed the land of glory into one of ruins, and the names of mighty kings were buried beneath the oblivion of degeneracy. Mighty cataclysms shook the world, and out of the land of darkness, the Great White Brotherhood led the faithful few into the promised land. Egypt, the land of glory, disintegrated into dust. The great temples of the pharaohs are ruins, and the temples of Isis are but broken heaps of sandstone. But what of the priest kings who labored there in the days of its glory? They are still with us, for those who were leaders before are leaders now, if they have continued to walk the path. Although his scepter is gone and his priestly vestments molded away, the priest king still walks the earth with the dignity and the power and the childlike simplicity that made him great before. He no longer wears the robes of his order, yet although he bears no credentials, he is as much a priest king now as then, for he still bears the true insignia of his rank. The coiled serpent has given place to knowledge and love. The hand that bestowed the riches of the past does little acts of kindness now. Although he no longer carries the scepters of self-mastery, still he manifests that mastery in his daily life. Although the altar fires within the temple at Karnak have long been dead, the true fire within himself still burns, and before it he still bows as he bowed in the days of Egypt's glory. Although the priest no longer is his counselor, and the wise ones of his country no longer aid him in problems of state, still he is never alone, for the priests in white and the counselors in blue still march with him and whisper words of strength when he needs them. Have you not seen people whom somehow you instinctively liked? Have you not seen charming people whom, in spite of their charms, you disliked? Have you not seen learned people who were fools, or impressed you as such? And then there are those who, though unschooled, give us the instinctive impression that they are very wise. They have the insignia of rank, truth, and love, which the loss of title or position cannot destroy. Kings with or without crowns, they were, and they still are kings, and will be to the end of time. They still manifest their rank, not by their superiority and their high-headedness, but by the soul qualities which they radiate from themselves. The purity of life and motive still radiates from those of old, who wore the apron of the initiate, for while that triangular apron with the serpent drawn upon it has long since rotted away, the spiritual counterpart of that symbol is still seen in the radiance of their daily lives, thus proving beyond all dispute that as they were priest-kings then, so are they today. In every walk of life we find them in the high places and in the low, but wherever found, they are still the mouthpieces of the gods, and through them comes the promise to all who strive. Kings they are, not of earth, but of heaven, and in the life of our own Master Jesus, we find one who joined himself to those who served, and who was a true king, even when his only crown was a wreath of thorns. Still in the invisible ether about the pyramid of Gizeh, the initiations continue. Still the initiate receives the insignia of his rank. Before that fire within himself, he makes his vows, and upon the burning altar of his own higher being, he lays his crown and his scepter, his robes and his jewels, his hates and his fears, and sanctifies his life as a priest-king, and swears to serve none but his own higher self, the God within.